about the equipment that you'll need to have for making the breads in this class. And I'm going to show you all of the things that I use, and then we'll talk about some things that you might have that are a little bit different that you can also use. I'm going to start with my two secret weapons, which are my Nutri-Mill grain mill, and this is what I use to grind the wheat berries into flour that I'll use for my bread. And this is my Bosch Universal Plus mixer, and this is what lets me mix and knead 6 loaves of whole grain bread dough at one time in about 10 minutes or so. And so if you have a different type of a mixer, we'll be discussing the changes that you need to make in your technique or in your timing for those. But let's say that you have no machinery at all in your house and you just want to start with things that you already have available. So all you will really need to get started to make bread by hand is a bowl and a spoon. You will also need some measuring cups and spoons. You'll need liquid measuring cup and dry measuring cups and spoons. A timer is a nice thing to have, particularly if you are making bread in a machine. You will want to keep track of how much time you spend kneading it. You could also use an oven timer, or you could use your watch. I also like to have this to remind me to check on the rising of my bread and of course the baking cycle. This is a tool that I highly recommend. It's called a bench knife or a bench scraper. And I use this when I take the dough out of my mixer and I want to divide it into the loaf portions, or for cutting it into pieces for dinner rolls and that sort of thing. But I also use it to scrape things up off of the counter. Now this is really nice to have, especially if you are going to be doing hand kneading, because you will use it to scrape the flour and the dough up and onto itself as you're kneading it. And that helps you have less mess on your hands. It doesn't stick to you quite as much. So I'll use this quite a bit during the hand kneading lesson. I also recommend that you have a food scale on hand to weigh your dough. When I'm making 6 loaves at one time, or even if I just want to have all of my dinner rolls look nice and the same size, I use a scale to measure the dough. You might have a digital one or a smaller one than this, but any type of scale will work for that. You will also need a rolling pin. This is a double-ended rolling pin. You might have the straight kind with the handles on both ends, but this is what we will be using for our roll-up bread, the cinnamon swirl that I'm going to show you how to make, and we'll also use it for cinnamon rolls and things like that. So you want to have a rolling pin on hand. Next, you will need some pans, and the number of pans that you need depends on the recipe that you're making. I will be giving you a recipe for 1 loaf batch, 2 loaf, 3 loaf, or 6 loaf. So you choose the number of pans that you need, and the type of pan is also something to take into consideration. I like to use these dark non-stick pans because they absorb heat in the oven because of the dark color, and they also help it to bake a little bit faster, and they make a nicely brown crust. If you happen to have instead a stainless steel pan or an aluminum pan that's bright and shiny like this, it will reflect heat away from the dough, and it will make for a little bit of a lighter or a paler crust. I like for my dinner rolls and buns and bowls to be a little bit lighter and softer on the bottom. So I have a light colored baking sheet for those. I also like to use parchment paper when I'm making especially cinnamon rolls or anything that's sticky or a little bit gooey, because it helps the cleanup to be a lot easier. Instead of parchment paper, you could just grease it liberally with some baking spray or some oil. To tell if the bread is done or not, I also highly recommend that you have a thermometer. Now this is just a meat thermometer that you can pick up at most any cooking store or discount store, and we're going to use this to insert into the middle of the bread to make sure that even though it looks done on the outside, make sure that the inside is done, because we wouldn't want to have doughy middle or doughy center in our bread. When the bread comes out of the oven, you will want to put it on a cooling rack so that it can cool quickly. You need to let it cool at least 15 minutes before you slice it. Otherwise, it will be gummy and doughy inside when you slice into it. And for slicing, you will need a serrated knife and a cutting board. If you happen to have an electric knife, that is a nice thing to have too, because especially for warm bread, it makes it a little bit easier to cut it. And it's also nice for making very thin slices for sandwiches. So these are some of the things that you'll need to have for the class. And we're going to talk about some of the mixers and machines that you might have, and then we're also going to talk about ingredients that you'll need as well. If the only mixer you happen to have is a hand mixer like this one, you can still use it to shave several minutes off of the time that you'll need to spend mixing and kneading your dough. In the initial stage of your dough, when it's a batter, it's very wet and liquidy, this will really help to get the yeast well distributed throughout the mixture, and it'll also aid the flour in the initial activation of the gluten. Now, as you add more and more flour to the mixture, it will get harder and harder for these small beaters to turn through the heavy dough. When that happens, you'll just discontinue use of the mixer and then take all of the dough out and finish kneading it by hand. You'll probably only be able to do one loaf of bread at a time this way, but still it will help you to do it a little bit faster and easier. This is a traditional stand mixer, and unlike the hand mixer, you can use this model to do all of the mixing and the kneading of your dough without needing to stop and finish it by hand. Now, there are a lot of different brands and sizes and wattages for this type of mixer, but in general, you will want to start out with this beater in place. And if your machine happens to have this flat beater or this paddle, you'll start this for the initial mixing of your dough. Now, you will only want to use one of those when the mixture is in the pourable batter stage. As you add more and more flour and the dough starts to thicken up, you'll want to switch over to the dough hook so that you don't risk causing any damage to your machine. Now, the amount of time that you need to spend kneading with this type of a mixer varies widely. It completely depends on the amount of power that your machine has. In general, you probably are going to need to spend 8 to 10 minutes, but your machine could be completely different. An older machine is going to perform differently than a newer machine. So 8 to 10 minutes might be too much for your machine, or it might not be enough. In a future lesson, I'm going to give you a foolproof test to let you know exactly when it's okay to stop kneading. During the kneading process, you'll take out a little piece of dough and do this test as many times as you need to, and that will help you to know for sure when it's okay to stop kneading. If you happen to be in the market to purchase a new mixer, there are a few things that you'll want to know about before you make that decision. When you get to the store, it can be very confusing because there are lots of different brands and there are lots of different sizes even within the same brand. So it can be confusing knowing which one that you should pick for the uses that you have in mind. Now, in general, there are 3 ways that manufacturers classify their mixers, and those ways are wattage, capacity, and yield, and you'll want to look at all 3 of those things. Now, here's the tricky part. The wattage really does not tell you what you think it does. Wattage is basically a unit of measurement that says how much power, how much electricity this unit is drawing. It doesn't tell you how much power it's putting out. That would actually be a measurement of horsepower. Now, what does that mean to you? Well, it means that you really can't compare any mixer that is of a different brand or a different size. So, for example, this particular model is on the lowest end of this manufacturer, and it happens to have a wattage of 275. 275 watts. My hand mixer, which was on the higher end of as far as hand mixers go, it was 300 watts. Now, if I looked at just those two numbers, I would say, well, the hand mixer must be more powerful, but it really isn't. What you really need to know in order to compare mixers is the amount of torque that the machine has. And unfortunately, that is not something that you can read on the box. Torque is the ability for an object to twist under power. And so that means that if you have a little bit of resistance, it can turn just fine, but as you add more and more resistance, it's going to be more and more difficult. Now, another thing that mixer manufacturers like to brag about is their capacity, or basically the size of the bowl. The capacity, usually in terms of the number of quarts or the number of pounds of dough that it can hold, is what it can hold if you filled it all the way completely full to the brim. But that wouldn't leave you any room to actually maneuver the mixture around. So of course you're never going to fill it all the way full. Now, a bigger bowl, yes, it does mean that you have a little bit more room to mix, and you might be able to do a little bit more, but it doesn't always tell you how much more powerful this machine is. For example, in this particular manufacturer's line of mixers, this is the very bottom level. The next stair step up has a larger bowl, but if you look at the yield, it doesn't actually allow you to do any additional whole wheat flour. The yield is the only thing that really gives you any indication of how powerful the mixer is. Now, the yield is usually listed in terms of the number of cups of flour or the number of loaves of bread that it can produce. Now, heads up right here, what do you think they're talking about? They're talking about cups of white flour and loaves of white bread. If you look at the fine print, there's a great big disclaimer that says if you're making whole wheat bread or if you're using whole wheat flour, those numbers are actually much smaller. So again, case in point, this particular mixer's instruction manual says that it can handle 8 cups of white flour, but it can only handle 6 cups of whole wheat flour. In the next model, its instruction manual says that it can handle 10 cups of white flour, but it can still only handle 6 cups of wheat flour. If you exceed those guidelines, it's very possible that you could burn out the motor and not get the life expectancy from your machine that you should. Now we come to the mixer for serious whole grain bread makers. If you have a large family, or if you would just like to be able to make a lot of bread at one time and then not have to bake very often in between, then this is probably the mixer that will fit your needs the best. The thing that really sets this mixer apart from the others is its very powerful transmission. It gives it the torque. Remember, torque is twist, that enables it to pass through all of the dough very easily. Now, this big dough hook actually is designed to knead 100% of the dough every 4 turns, every 4 times that it goes around the bowl. So that is a lot of kneading action, and it takes place very quickly. It takes me about 5 minutes or so to mix the bread, adding the amount of flour a little bit at a time, and once that's done, it takes 4 to 5 minutes after that point to finish kneading the dough. That's for all 9 pounds of it. That enables me to make 6 loaves worth of bread, all the way from grinding of flour to the finished baked loaf in under 90 minutes. This mixer's wattage is 800 watts, and it has a 6.5 quart bowl with a capacity of 15 pounds of dough. But as we learned before, those two numbers aren't particularly useful, because what we really need to know is what the yield is. And the yield for this is about 9 pounds of dough that it can knead comfortably, which equals about 6 1.5 pound loaves of bread. Another type of mixer is a bread machine. Now, this isn't really my favorite way to make bread because I'm never really satisfied with the way that the crust comes out. But I think you do have better success if you use it just primarily for the mixing and the kneading function alone. If at the end of that time you take it out and shape it yourself and put it into a traditional shaped pan and bake it in the oven, I think that you get a much better product. Otherwise, if you allow the machine to do everything for you, you may not get very consistent results using the recipes and the techniques in this class. whenever I make bread in this machine, when I'm traveling or doing a convention or classes away from my kitchen where I have an oven, I have found that I have to add a little bit extra gluten. I have to be a little more careful about the temperature of the water and the amount of the liquid to flour ratio that I put in there. So if I have it a little bit too wet, then it doesn't come out rising quite as nicely as it should.